Hello, this is Priscilla of Speakers Connect. Today, we're very happy to have Richard Gerver with us. Richard is the author of international bestsellers, Simple Thinking and Change. Learn to love it, learn to lead it. We will be speaking with Richard on how to transition from chaos to control in this COVID-19 era. So Richard, welcome today.
Hi Priscilla, it's great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me and thank you for your kind introduction.
Thank you. So maybe let's start with your background. You have transformed a failing school into one of the most acclaimed learning environments in the world in just 2 years. Can you tell us more about it and what have you learned from this experience?
Yeah, I mean, my whole career has been one of, I think, moving from episodes of chaos to control. When I first left education myself, I wanted to become a professional actor and was really bad at it. So that didn't last very long. I became a teacher actually when I went to university and fell in love with a beautiful young woman who was training to be a teacher. Because she was training to be a teacher, it encouraged me to think about that as a first career. And so I went into that, and just so you know, that beautiful young woman has been my wife for 30 years. So it's all worked out okay. Anyway, yes, I then became, after a career as a teacher, I eventually became the principal of a failing school in the middle of the UK, right in the heart of the UK in the Midlands near Nottingham. And I was told actually, it was a state school, and I was told actually the school was so bad that the government were considering shutting it down. Now this was back at the start of the millennium. This was right at the start of the 2000s. And actually what happened next was an extraordinary journey, which we don't have time to talk about in full today. But by harnessing the power of our community, our teachers, our children, our parents, everybody, we threw away the rule book and innovated our way out of the problem. And as a result, within 2 years, the school went from being rated as one of the worst in the United Kingdom to winning a UNESCO World Education Award inside of 2 years. Now, like most people, I think, in any job, all you do is you go into work every day and you want to do the best you can do, right? And you think that what you're doing is the same as everybody else. So at no time during that period of working in that school did I think we'd done anything exceptional. I just thought we'd done our job. But after about 7 years of the process and the school grew and actually became globally renowned, it got to a point actually where I was being asked more and more and more to go and share the story outside. So I was traveling all over the world talking about the school. And I mean, that was interesting in a way, because what became fascinating to me was people wanted to know as much about the human leadership of that process as they did actually about the content of the journey. But as a result, after 7 years, I was kind of toying with the idea, because I was trying to still be a school principal as well as doing that. And my wife said to me at that time, you know, Richard, you're working more than 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We never see you. You're going to have to make a choice. And that was one of the first great moments personally for me of challenge in terms of change. You know, I had an incredibly stable job by this time, a huge reputation. Very proud of the community, loved the community I was working in. And the options were continue to be the school principal of this amazing place, or give up my job, give up my salary, give up my pension, you know, and of course I had a family and bills to pay as everybody does, and go and become a freelance speaker and author. And I procrastinated. You know, a lot of us do that in times of change. We love an idea of doing something, but then we kind of almost try and find excuses to talk ourselves out of it, right? So I procrastinated for ages about why it was the best thing to do was to stay in the school. And again, my wife, who you're beginning to understand is quite a theme here in my life, turned around to me one night and said probably the most powerful thing anyone's ever said to me in an act of love, really. She said, Richard, you've spent 20 years nearly, at that time, telling other people to take risks and seize opportunities. Are you going to be a hypocrite? And what she meant was the safe option was school. And she was encouraging me, despite the risks to our family, to jump, which is so that's what I did. You know, you do what your wife tells you to do, right? And And so I left, and having had the extraordinary experience in the school, really started to, what fascinated me was the whole thing around change, and particularly the human aspects of change. You know, the school I'd been in had been habitually failing for 10 years, and I needed to understand what it was we'd achieved to create something so seismic so quickly, right? And so that's really where the next part of my life's journey began. And it's meant that for the last 13 years, increasingly, although always having education at my heart, I've worked with organizations across the world in a whole range of different, areas, exploring that whole thing around human leadership and change, and I guess learning. So it's been an amazing journey, really. Yeah.
Wow, fascinating. I really love the story and the trust and the confidence you have with your wife, and it turned out very well.
So far, so good, Priscilla. And the main thing is we're still together, which means she still must be able to put up with me.
I look forward to maybe meeting her someday.
Sure.
Lovely. So yeah, so that is a really great story, and certainly we are now facing a very unusual time. And I think many of us now feel a little bit out of control, a little bit stressed. I'm sure you have gone through times like that before as well. So what would be your advice if we are going through kind of like an emotional roller coaster?
I think the main thing is to understand that it's natural, and we all go through it. And we go through kind of the phases of change, I think, at different paces, but we all go through it. And I think one of the first dangerous things, particularly around when change is imposed on us, there's a big difference between change being imposed on you, which of course has happened as a result of the COVID crisis. For the entire world, that change has been imposed on us, to change which you're actually activating and driving. And a lot of that comes down to the key issue, which is around the perception of control. So if you feel in control of what you're living through, even if some of it is new, some of it is uncertain, if you feel a level of control, you feel better about it, because you have the levers which you can move and make happen. I think what people have experienced over the last few months, and I think will probably continue to experience globally for some time to come, is this feeling that actually there's nothing I'm able to do. And that's really to try and explain to people it's okay, because I think there are kind of 6 phases emotionally to that process, right? So if people think back to the first moment they knew we were going into some sort of emergency situation, the lockdown, the closure of businesses, the confinement to homes, most people in that first moment felt an absolute state of paralysis. We froze. We just had, it was like and at best we became manic almost, but most people just froze, and it was like living an out of body experience. And the thing with change is, this is how it feels in normal times in an organization too, just at a less amplified level, right? The second phase then is once we go through that kind of paralysis, a lot of people experience a denial. So they kind of think, well, it's not going to happen to me. It won't happen to us. If I stick my head in the sand, it'll go away. And what I see often in organizations from a lot of employees is that the head in the sand thing. We hear all the time from people, oh, if I just stand still long enough, it'll come round again. This idea that everything seems to be cyclical. So that stage of denial. And once we've been through the stage of denial, what you then tend to feel, and I think I've seen a lot of this in the last few months, is anger. Because people come out of denial, and the way they come out of denial is to project the issues onto other people or onto other organizations. So the human instinct is to want to blame somebody or something. So often in an organization, it's hierarchy. We'll blame the hierarchy. We'll blame the management. We'll blame the leadership. In this case, people have been trying to blame everything from a wet market in Wuhan to a laboratory to world leaders. I mean, we just have to look at what certain leaders in certain parts of the world have been saying, to see that anger phase, right? And then the most dangerous of the 6 phases, really, I think, is people go from that anger and they realize it's wasted energy, nothing's happening, it's not making them feel any more in control, and they tend to slip into a depression, a listlessness, you know. People, and I have seen this so often during the lockdown period, where people have explained finding it hard to get out of bed, to not dress properly, you know, to not wanting to talk to anybody. And I think, again, we've all been through that period. And really the key is those are the 4, if you like, destructive phases we tend to experience when change is imposed on us. But then the way we can activate a more progressive, positive feel is to try and move to the next phase, which is one I describe as exploration. You know, if you start to ask questions, you start to gain an interest. So what actually is happening? What is going on? What are the repercussions? And most importantly, what can I do to get involved in this? You know, what can I do to take some semblance of control? So, for example, on a very personal level, you know, as a professional speaker, like for so many people in our industry, that day, ground zero, was horrific, because in an instant, my entire career was flattened. And even now, you know, what's brilliant is to see the rise in virtual work now, which is so exciting, actually, because I think if we get it right, it can sit along live podium work for a long time to come. But, you know, it was a really scary moment. And I went through those 4 phases and then started to say, okay, so what can I do? So I did little things that made me feel that I had some semblance of control. I bought a better webcam, right, with a higher quality image, which I hope people can appreciate. I bought a microphone and various bits, and started to explore what online virtual events would look like. I started approaching people saying I'd love to do webinars and podcasts so that I could feel productive, right? Which leads to the 6th and final stage, which is acceptance. And at that point, really, you can find yourself fully immersed in a constructive and progressive phase of dealing with that change process. And I think that's where I am now. And I think where a lot of people are beginning to find themselves now, where they've begun to understand the parameters of the new rules we're living in. And they've started to be really productive and constructive about how to use them. And the killer, really, the most powerful sense that you know you've achieved that kind of state is when you start to look to want to support others and think, okay, now I can use my experience to help others come through that process. So I guess for me, it's been an interesting journey. It's not a smooth curve. You know, you can go back as well as forwards, a bit like the conditions around the virus. You know, you can slip back and come forwards again. But I think the key is to keep sight on saying to yourself, I have to force myself to start asking questions, to be curious, and trust that if I do that enough, I can move towards that 6th phase, and hopefully a place where you feel more in control.
Indeed. And yeah, and be nice to ourselves and allow the time, right? Sometimes,
yeah.
we sometimes we push a little bit too hard, but I think allow the time. And another thing, I think more recently, I look at it like, this is also a phrase I see so much: innovation. That certainly come out from a lot of industries, a lot of individuals. People learn very fast, and we try to cope with the situation. If, okay, plan A doesn't work, how about plan B or plan C? So yeah, definitely this is a challenging time, but we also see a lot of new opportunities.
By the way, I think that's a really interesting and important point about innovation, because a huge number of industries have been talking about wanting to innovate, to be more creative over a number of years, in fact, decades. And there's a huge frustration in so many organizations that things tend to get in the way, whether that's human capacity, whether it's a belief that we've got to measure innovation against risk and you know, just being sustainable, and all of those things, right? It's that measure of efficiency versus innovation. And I think what we need to take from the last few weeks is a number of things. One is we need to trust ourselves more when it comes to innovation, because what we've seen in the last 3 or 4 months across the world has been remarkable, remarkable, very fast, fleet-footed transformation and change in a whole range of sectors. And I think to an extent, one of the things that's held us back for so long is our belief that our job is to pursue efficiency all the time, and nothing can get in the way. And what we've proved to ourselves in the last few weeks, both on personal and professional levels, is actually we're capable of doing remarkable things. And I hope one of the learnings that we take from the dreadful events of the last few months is to trust ourselves more and realize we're much better at change and capable of innovation than ever we believed we were.
Indeed. And another point I really agree with you is the last phrase in particular is when we feel that we are more in control, we should also try to see whether we can help each other out. So would you mind maybe let us know more about how we can inspire others, even we are now facing challenges, and make the best of the situation?
I think, you know, I'm really heartened by that, because I think we've seen an explosion of humanity, which again, you know, on a geopolitical level, I hope is something that will sustain us for a very long time to come, because the world was almost splitting apart over the last few years, various instances, you know, sort of things like Brexit in Europe and the kind of nationalist agenda in certain countries. And I think what we've seen is the power of collaboration and humanity coming together. And I think this idea of supporting and helping each other is really powerful from a number of perspectives, actually. I learned this very early on as a teacher. You know, one of the things that's really interesting is it's okay to know something or to be able to do something yourself, but actually to progress further on a personal level, there's nothing more powerful than trying to explain or transfer that knowledge or skill to somebody else. And it gives you a sense of purpose, and it also helps you push your own intellect and understanding of something often you've done because it just comes naturally to you. So I think on one level, on a very personal level, supporting other people is incredibly powerful for your own levels of self-esteem, your own levels of self-development, and that feeling of purpose. But at the same time, you know, by supporting other people, you really are giving the gift of collaboration and building, if you like, the capacity of a bigger you. You know, if you can amplify you by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people, suddenly you're building a much more powerful movement for progression and positive change. And I think the best way to do it, by the way, to support other people, is to tell stories. I think, you know, when you tell your own story and the experiences you've been through, it's something I've believed as an educator and as a speaker and a writer, really, all of my adult career, that the best way to help people empathize, understand, and gain confidence in joining you on a journey is to be authentic and to tell stories. And I think right now, people who have reached that 6th phase in the change process, I think the best way they can support others is by telling their own story with authenticity and honesty, so that people can see the hooks and points at which they identify. And the hope then comes from that person's just like me, and actually they've managed to move forward, which gives me the confidence to do the same thing.
Right. Right. And I hope that the chat that we have today with the stories that you tell us will actually be also helpful for our audiences and our contacts as well.
I hope so.
Yeah. So any final thoughts for our audiences on this?
I think not really. I think the really important thing for people to remember is this idea of trying to find hooks and handholds onto feeling elements of control. You know, whether it's change through the COVID crisis, whether it's longer term down the road when you're looking at change as part of your developmental process. The first thing to say to yourself is to understand all of those phases, the paralysis, the anger, but actually to say constantly through that, where's the foothold? Where's the hand grab? What can I do, even if it's tiny, to begin to feel that control. Because I think it's control and a sense of overcoming powerlessness that turns change from something that's a negative connotation into one that's positive.
Definitely. Definitely. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, experience, and advices, and also the 6 phrase of how we can gain more control even in chaos. So I hope this is also helpful for our audiences. If you're interested in having Richard to speak to your group, do contact us. And so today, thank you very much for your time, Richard. And I hope that we can have more conversations down the road.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's listening. And most importantly, stay safe and healthy.
Take care, and I see you very soon.
I can't wait. Take care.
Thank you.